All righty. Well, lovers of wisdom, let's look here at some of the overview of the readings and themes in Unit 4. In Unit 4, so in Telepath, if you already looked at it, or if you haven't, like the first half of In Telepath is all about argumentation and syllogisms and all that kind of stuff, fallacies and whatnot, which are all about correct thinking. Now, sometimes people get a little upset and they're like, correct thinking, who are you to tell me that I'm thinking incorrectly? But like everything, we need to be trained in how to think properly. And so that's the whole part about why in Telepath they spent that time talking about fallacies and stuff. Because if we are going to make ethical decisions, right, which is what this course is all about, we got to be able to make decisions properly, right? Going back to the tripartite soul, recall the importance of reason. A lot of the fallacies that we looked at were based on emotion. Emotion tends to cloud our judgment. So that's what that was all about. Then if you've if you've gotten into some of the readings, you'll also notice that in the texts, one of the big themes is culpability. That does come up in, what was that one? In Freedom and Determination, Moral Responsibility, it comes up in Telepath too. But so why are the other two sources so heavy into freedom, determinism, free will, all that kind of stuff? Well, the deal is it has to do with culpability. Culpability, culpa in Latin means fault, right? So when we're talking about ethics and we're asking ourselves, what's the right thing to do? And we're really paying attention to the decision-making process itself. Then one thing we also have to realize is, well, there's punishments for not doing things, right? So you can get fired or, worse, sued, right, for discrimination or harassment at work or something, right? You can get arrested for all sorts of things. But all of these sort of punishments or consequences depend on whether you are at fault. And here's the problem. In philosophy, it comes down to determinism versus existentialism. In other words, this is like total free will over here, and this is like no free will. Because here's the deal, right? It's just like, what's an example? I mean, I don't know. I'm trying to think of an example. Okay, yeah, murder, for instance, homicide, right? So murder means that you intentionally kill somebody, right? However, if it's self-defense, then it's not. No, that's not a good one. Okay, ways of killing people, homicide. Okay, so murder means that you have to have what they call mens rea, right? In other words, you have to have a certain frame of mind where you're deliberately, knowingly killing somebody, right? Versus someone breaks into your home and you kill somebody in self-defense. Obviously, those are not the same, right? Because in one, you had the will to kill somebody deliberately. In the other one, you did not necessarily have the will to kill somebody deliberately. You were simply protecting yourself. And then there could also be an accident, right? In which, a car accident, you killed somebody, but it was not intentional at all. So of those three scenarios, it's like one of them involves a lot of culpability. Deliberately killing someone, planning it out, executing it, murder, culpable. And you had the freedom to do it. You had the free will. You chose to kill somebody. Car accident? No, you did not choose to kill somebody. It just, it's an accident. That's why they call it an accident, right? So there's no culpability on your part in that one. In other words, culpability is crucial in ethics because you can't punish somebody if they don't know what they're doing, right? So I'm not going to punish my dogs in the same way I punish my children because the dogs are bound by, you know, instinct. They're not culpable. So determinism is the belief that you are determined, and this terma here comes from the Latin terminare, which means end or boundary. So in other words, there is a predetermined end. I just used the word in defining the word. There's already an end that has been mapped out. In other words, it's like fate, right? Whereas free will over here, we're using existentialism as our philosophical example here. But free will or volition is the exact opposite, obviously, right? So you have the freedom to make the choices that you want. And you'll notice I've got it on a scale here, right? And here's a few of the guys that came up in your readings. And there's another one named Descartes that we're going to spend a little bit more time on, who is maybe a little bit more difficult to place, but nevertheless. So I want to focus on a couple, but first let's introduce all of them. So this Baron Dahlbach guy here, he argued that for every action, every effect, everything you do, there's a cause, right? And so because there's a cause, in fact, literally the word because means caused by, right? And so his idea, and it totally makes sense, is that since there's a cause for every action, then everything you do is caused. In other words, it's determined, because all you need is the right cause and you'll get the right action. Does that kind of make sense? And he argued that it's just that we don't know the causes. And so we think we have free will, but eventually, given more brain science, we would understand that, no, we'll find causes for everything. So therefore, you're totally determined. At which point, how do you hold someone responsible, right? It's sort of like the Judas problem in Judeo-Christian religion. It's like, okay, well, Judas, that was his role, was to betray Christ, right? And he knew about that beforehand. So how culpable is Judas, right? You know what I mean? In that regard? Oh, I got me some nice coffee here. So that's Baron Dahlbach. Then this Hobbes guy. So Thomas Hobbes, he compares people to machines. And his whole thing is that we are, basically complex machines. And he also holds that we are given to our selfish natures. So in other words, we have a nature that makes us, pits us against each other and makes us unruly, violent, selfish. And we're never going to rise above that. And so because of that, he argues, for instance, politically, that you need a very strong king and a very strong police state to keep people from destroying themselves. Okay, then you've got Nietzsche. And Nietzsche, he says, he advocates, and this is in the readings, that there's actually two ethical systems, the master and the slave. And so Nietzsche is a little bit more down our road to free will, sort of. Because Nietzsche believes that history is fate, like there's cycles of history, and you're not going to change that. However, you do have a choice as to what you do with it. So he says the master type person, or ethical, or character, right? Because remember, character is when you internalize your ethics. So his idea is that the master ethic is one of strength, domination, creation. So these become like the noble, the people who like rule and not rule, lead society. But then there's the slave, where he says slave mentality Slave mentality is it's a chosen kind of thing where you're more interested in being content. You're more interested in, not competing. You're more interested in peace, patience, equality, that kind of stuff. He calls this the noble kind of thing, and this the herd mentality, like sheep. So do you want to be the sheep or the lion? That kind of concept. And so to Nietzsche, it's not totally determined. Well, it is determined in the sense that events are determined. But how you choose to identify yourself, you have control over. Do you want to be a sheep or do you want to be a wolf? I'm going to save Descartes for a separate thing. But Descartes, to make a long story short, talks about duality. We are like both mental and physical, and there are ramifications, but we'll get to that later. Aristotle, right? Remember, Aristotle argued for virtue. And so the deal for him is you have choice as to what type of person you're going to be, right? Now, keep in mind tripartite soul, right? So it's like we have to choose reason, but we have that choice. And the more we choose reason, the more we choose to act with reason, the more virtuous that we will become, right? So in other words, our actions create our character. They create who we are. And then there's Kant, and Kant with the categorical imperative, which I'm going to call CI. And there was a lot of reading about Kant, wasn't there? And deontology. His thing is called deontology. And the idea there is, ironically, notice I've got him way over on free will, because he's the rule guy, the must guy, the duty guy. But remember, you make those duties yourself. And so as long as you're being rational, Kant's whole point is you've got nothing influencing you. It's totally your rational call. And then Sartre. Sartre is the guy who literally coined the phrase existentialism. And his idea is that you are born nothing. You are born no thing. In other words, you have absolute total control and choice to choose what you are. So anyway, that's sort of the scale. And the two that I want to look at, whoopsie daisy, in a little bit greater depth are Sartre and Descartes. So after this, I'm going to make a separate little video on those guys because I think they're worth our time. John Rawls was also mentioned in there, and he brings up a really good point. Basically, he's asking this question: do our identities and self-interest determine us? And so the idea is, it's like, you know who you are, right? So, whatever. Let's say you were born into a certain class in your family, with a certain race, a certain geographic location, all that kind of stuff. Then you're likely to understand justice in a way that suits you. Like, for instance, I'm an educator, right? And so to me, what's a just budget, like a government budget, when the government puts out its budget, whether it's the state or whether it's the nation, understand budgets are always a manifestation of ethical priorities and justice, right? So it is just to spend most of our money on defense, evidently, because that's one of our biggest expenditures, but not so much on education. So because of my identity and self-interest as an educator, I am going to think that it is just to spend more money on education, right? So it's almost like who we are, what we do, our self-interest identity kind of biases us, obviously, to a certain type of justice, right? So Rawls suggests in his reading that the only way to be fair and just is that we all have a veil of ignorance. So we have no identity. So when it comes to writing a constitution, it should be made by people who have no idea what type of person they are. They don't know if they're a businessman. They don't know if they're a plumber. They don't know if they're an artist, a teacher, a soldier, whatever, it doesn't matter. So that when they write laws, those laws would have to be universal, right? because you wouldn't write the law with yourself in mind. You would write the law for everyone in mind. Absolute equality. That's the only way to be just. And that would be the only way to avoid, fault. But anyway, I want to make a separate one on Descartes and Sartre.